I stand outside the university administration building, phone trembling in my weathered hand. Jackson's voice still echoes. "Dad, don't come. You embarrass me." Those words cut deeper than when my wife died 3 years ago. For 4 years, I've worked double shifts at the hardware store, sold my truck, emptied my retirement account. $42,000 for this final semester alone. When the bursar's office called asking me to confirm the payment, my finger hovered over the decline button. One click would change everything. I pressed it. 2 weeks before graduation, Id called Jackson to discuss the ceremony details. My excitement bubbled over as I described the new shirt Id bought specifically for his big day. Navy blue with thin white stripes, the nicest thing Id owned since Margaret passed. Id even gotten it pressed at the dry cleaner downtown, spending money I couldn't really spare. "About graduation, Dad." Jackson's voice carried that familiar dismissive tone Id grown to dread. "I'm not sure you should come." The words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my coffee cup with shaking fingers, staring at the photos covering my kitchen table. Pictures of Jackson through the years, Margaret beaming beside him at every milestone. Little League games, high school debates, the day he got accepted to the university. "What do you mean, son?" "Look, it's going to be this whole formal thing with Chelsea's family. Her dad's law firm is sponsoring a reception afterward. These are important people, successful professionals. I just think—" He paused, searching for words that would sting less. "He failed. You might feel out of place. Out of place. At my own son's graduation." I walked over to Margaret's photo on the mantel, touching the frame with calloused fingers. Shed worked 2 jobs as a waitress to help save for Jackson's college fund before cancer took her away. Her dream was simple. Their son would be the first in our family to graduate college. She never lived to see him start his freshman year. After she died, Id made a sacred promise to her memory. Jackson would get his degree no matter what sacrifice it required from me. I sold our family home, the 3-bedroom ranch where Wed raised Jackson, and moved into a cramped 1-bedroom apartment above Hendrick's hardware store where I worked. The house sale barely covered 2 years of tuition. For the remaining 2 years, I'd taken on weekend landscaping jobs, my 67-year-old back screaming in protest as I hauled mulch and trimmed hedges. During winter months, I shoveled driveways from dawn until dusk, earning $20 here, $30 there. Every penny went toward Jackson's education. I'd stopped eating lunch, surviving on black coffee and the occasional apple. Dinner became peanut butter sandwiches or canned soup. I hadn't bought new clothes in 3 years. My winter coat had holes in both elbows, but Jackson's tuition came first. Always. The phone call from the bursar's office came on a Tuesday morning while I was stocking fertilizer bags. Mrs. Rodriguez, the billing coordinator, spoke in her usual professional tone. "Mr. Mitchell, am calling to confirm the final payment for Jackson's spring semester. The amount is $42,815. Well, need authorization by end of business tomorrow to ensure his degree completion." I'd expected this call. The final semester always costs the most, with graduation fees and final project costs added on top of regular tuition. I'd been saving every extra dollar for months, working 70-hour weeks to accumulate enough. My bank account showed exactly $43,000, representing 3 years of near starvation and back-breaking labor. "Yes, ma'am. I'll authorize the payment this evening." But now, sitting in my sparse apartment after Jackson's humiliating rejection, I stared at the university's online payment portal. Margaret's photo watched me from the side table. What would she think of how our son had turned out? Would she want me to keep enabling his entitled attitude? My finger hovered over the confirm payment button. Then I thought about Jackson's words again. "You embarrass me." I remembered the last time I'd visited campus, how Head cringed when his friends saw my worn work boots and paint-stained jeans, how Head quickly hustled me away from the student center, claiming he was late for class. I clicked decline payment instead. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the woman's voice was familiar. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Patricia Chen, Tyler's mother." Tyler is Jackson's roommate. I knew Tyler vaguely. A polite kid from a wealthy family in Connecticut. His mother had called once before about Parents' Weekend, which Jackson had told me was canceled. "Hi, Mrs. Chen. How can I help you? I hope you don't mind me calling. Tyler mentioned that Jackson's been under a lot of stress lately, and I wanted to reach out. We were at Chez Laurent last weekend celebrating Tyler's internship, and we saw Jackson there with his girlfriend. Such a lovely girl. But Tyler mentioned Jackson was concerned about money, and I thought perhaps." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, if your family needed any assistance, Robert and I would be happy to help. We know how expensive these final semesters can be." Chez Laurent. I'd driven past that restaurant countless times on my way to campus. Valet parking, $100 entrees, wine bottles that cost more than I made in a week. Jackson was eating there while I survived on peanut butter sandwiches. "Mrs. Chen, I appreciate the offer, but I think there's been some confusion. Jackson's expenses are covered." "Oh, wonderful! Tyler mentioned Jackson's penthouse apartment is absolutely gorgeous. And that new BMW he's driving? You must be so proud of his success. He mentioned something about investment dividends helping with costs." My blood turned cold. Penthouse apartment? BMW? Jackson lived in standard dormitory housing and took the campus shuttle everywhere. At least, that's what Head told me. After ending the call, I drove straight to campus. I found Jackson's new address through the student directory, my heart sinking as I pulled into the parking lot of Grandview Luxury Student Living. The building gleamed with glass and steel, featuring amenities I'd only seen in magazine advertisements. A doorman in a crisp uniform greeted residents at the entrance. And there, parked in space 47, sat a gleaming black BMW with Jackson's Political Science Honor Society sticker on the rear window. I sat in my rusted Honda Civic, staring at that car and fighting back tears. How had Jackson afforded luxury housing and a $40,000 vehicle? Where had I gone wrong as a father? Margaret would have known how to handle this. Shed always understood our son better than I did. The doorman approached my car, probably wondering why he'd been sitting there for 20 minutes. "Excuse me, sir. Are you visiting a resident?" "My son lives here. Jackson Mitchell, Unit 12B. The man's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Mitchell's father. He talks about you all the time. Mentions what a successful entrepreneur you are. Is very proud of the real estate empire you've built." Real estate empire? I owned nothing but a beaten-down Honda and the clothes on my back. Jackson had created an elaborate fantasy about our family's financial situation. But why? And how was he affording this lifestyle on the money he'd been sending for basic dormitory living? Something was terribly wrong, and for the first time in 4 years, I began to question whether my sacrifices had created a monster instead of the educated, grateful son Margaret had envisioned. 10 minutes after declining Jackson's payment, my phone erupted with the distinctive ringtone I'd assigned to his number. The opening notes of "Take Me Home, Country Roads" had seemed appropriate back when he first left for college. Now the melody sounded mocking. "Dad? Dad, what the hell did you do?" Jackson's voice pitched higher than it heard since his teenage years. "The payment got declined. The bursar's office just called me." I took a slow sip of my lukewarm coffee, buying time to steady my nerves. "I'm aware of that, son. You're aware." His voice cracked. "This isn't a game. Graduation is in 4 days. If that payment doesn't go through, they won't release my diploma. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you told me not to come to your graduation ceremony." Silence stretched between us. I could hear Jackson breathing heavily, probably pacing around his luxurious apartment that I wasn't supposed to know about. "Look, I'm sorry about that, okay?" I was stressed. Chelsea's family is really uptight about appearances, and I just thought, another pause. "Can we talk about this later? Just authorize the payment, please." "No." The word came out firmer than it intended. After decades of saying yes to Jackson's every request, giving him everything I could possibly provide, that single syllable felt revolutionary. "You just ruined my life over one stupid comment," Jackson shouted. "Do you have any idea what this means? 4 years of work down the drain because you decided to be petty." Before I could respond, he hung up. The silence in my apartment felt profound. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to solve Jackson's problems or fund his next request. I sat quietly, listening to the sounds of ordinary life filtering up from the hardware store below. Mr. Peterson arguing with his wife about paint colors. Mrs. Sullivan's granddaughter laughing at something on her phone. 20 minutes later, my landline rang. The caller ID showed University Administration. Mr. Mitchell, this is Dean Williams, from the College of Liberal Arts. I understand there's been some confusion regarding Jackson's final payment. Dean Williams sounded younger than it expected, his voice carrying the polished confidence of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. I'd never spoken with him before, despite Jackson being in his final semester. No confusion, Dean Williams. I declined to make the payment. I see. Jackson mentioned there might be a family emergency affecting your ability to cover the costs. The university has some emergency loan programs that might help bridge this gap. Jackson is an exemplary student, and we'd hate to see his graduation delayed over financial difficulties. Family emergency? Dean, what exactly did Jackson tell you about our situation? He submitted a hardship application last month, explaining that his father suffered a workplace injury and has been unable to work. He mentioned significant medical bills that have affected the family's ability to maintain educational expenses. I have the documentation right here. My hands clenched into fists. Workplace injury? Medical bills? I'd worked every single day this semester, often pulling 12-hour shifts when other employees called out sick. The only medical expense I'd had was $15 for reading glasses at the drugstore. Dean Williams. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. I've never submitted any hardship documentation, and I haven't suffered any injury. I work full-time at Hendrick's hardware store and have maintained steady employment for 8 years. The silence on his end stretched longer than comfortable. Mr. Mitchell, I'm looking at an application dated March 15th with medical documentation from St. Mary's Hospital regarding your back surgery and physical therapy requirements. It includes a doctor's note restricting you from lifting anything over 10 pounds. I've never had back surgery. I've never even been to St. Mary's Hospital. This is very concerning. I'll need to review this file immediately. In the meantime, Jackson's payment status will remain frozen pending investigation of these discrepancies. After hanging up, I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my television. Jackson had created fraudulent medical documentation to gain financial aid he didn't need. But the lies ran deeper than I'd imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Mitchell? This is Chelsea Romano, Jackson's girlfriend. Could we talk? It's important. I called the number back, curious about the young woman who had somehow convinced my son that I was too embarrassing to attend his graduation. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for calling back. Chelsea's voice carried the confidence of someone raised with privilege. I wanted to apologize for any misunderstanding about graduation. Jackson mentioned you might not be feeling well enough to attend, but I wanted you to know you're absolutely welcome at our celebration dinner. Feeling well enough. Your recovery from the construction accident. Jackson told me about the months of physical therapy and how difficult it's been for your family financially. I have so much respect for how you've supported his education despite your own challenges. Construction accident, physical therapy. The lies multiplied like weeds. Chelsea, I think Jackson has misled you about several things. I've never worked construction, and I haven't had any accidents. Oh, her confusion was audible, but he showed me the photos of you in the hospital bed. And he's always talking about how his father is this successful contractor who owns multiple properties around town. He mentions your real estate investments all the time. The contradictions made my head spin. To his roommate's mother, I was a successful entrepreneur. To the university, I was an injured worker, unable to support my son. To his girlfriend, I was both wealthy and recovering from serious injury. Chelsea, I work at a hardware store. I don't own any properties, and I certainly haven't been in any hospital. The silence stretched until I wondered if Shed hung up. Mr. Mitchell, she finally said, her voice smaller now. Jackson is planning to propose to me at graduation. He said the engagement ring came from money his investment portfolio earned this semester. Are you telling me that's not true either? My stomach dropped. Investment portfolio? Jackson had no investments beyond the education it purchased for him. How much did this ring cost, Chelsea? $12,000. He bought it at Cartier downtown. Said his portfolio had an exceptional quarter and he wanted to celebrate our future together. $12,000. More than I made in 6 months. Money that should have gone toward textbooks and living expenses. Money it earned by skipping meals and working weekends until my joints ached. Chelsea, I need you to understand something. Every penny Jackson has spent in the last 4 years came from my paycheck. He has no portfolio, no investments, no trust fund. I've been paying his full tuition by working 70-hour weeks and living in a 1-bedroom apartment above the store where I work. When she spoke again, tears thickened her voice. He told me you were too proud to accept help from his success. He said you insisted on living modestly despite his achievements. I thought it was so sweet how much he respected your independence. After ending the call with Chelsea, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment. Jackson had constructed an elaborate web of lies around our relationship, telling different people different stories depending on what he needed from them. Had convinced his girlfriend's wealthy family that I was a proud but successful man choosing to live humbly. Had told the university I was a disabled worker unable to support him. Had portrayed himself to friends as the heir to a real estate fortune. But the most painful truth was beginning to surface. Jackson was ashamed of who I really was. A 67-year-old man who sold screws and paint for a living. Who wore the same 3 shirts in rotation because new clothes meant less money for his son's future. Margaret's dream of an educated, grateful son had somehow twisted into something ugly. Jackson had gotten his education, but gratitude had been replaced by entitlement, love replaced by embarrassment. Tomorrow I would start digging deeper into just how far his deception reached. Because if Jackson could lie about medical emergencies and family wealth, what else was he hiding? The next morning, I drove to Jackson's building with a clearer purpose. I needed to understand the scope of his lies before deciding whether to restore his payment. Maybe there was an explanation for everything. Maybe he'd misunderstood the situation. The doorman, whose name tag read Roberto, greeted me with genuine warmth. "Mr. Mitchell, good to see you again. Jackson just left for class, but he mentioned you might stop by. Roberto, I'm curious about something. Jackson talks about me to residents here." "Oh, absolutely. Has very proud of his entrepreneur father, always mentioning the business empire you built from nothing, how you taught him everything about real estate investment. He tells everyone about the 15 properties you own across the county and how you're grooming him to take over operations after graduation. 15 properties. The number made me dizzy. I owned nothing except debt. He brings different groups of friends sometimes. Tell each group the same story." Roberto's expression shifted slightly. "Well, actually it depends on the crowd. With the business students, he talks about your real estate portfolio. With the kids from wealthy families, he mentions your consulting firm and how you advise other entrepreneurs. Last month, when his literature class visited, he said you were a successful contractor who built custom homes for celebrities. Different stories for different audiences." "Exactly, but always successful stories. He really admires you, Mr. Mitchell. You raised a good kid." I thanked Roberto and drove home, my mind churning. Jackson had created multiple fictional versions of my identity, each tailored to impress specific groups. But why go to such elaborate lengths? My phone rang as I pulled into the hardware store parking lot. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. "Byron, this is Helen Henderson, Margaret's friend from the church auxiliary." My heart warmed hearing Helen's voice. She'd been Margaret's closest friend, the two of them organizing every church, social, and charity drive for 20 years. Helen had been a pallbearer at Margaret's funeral, one of the few people who truly understood how much I'd lost. "Helen, so good to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, dear. But I'm calling because I'm worried about Jackson." "Worried? What's wrong?" "Byron, I've been sending Jackson money every month since Margaret passed. $500 on the 15th. just like clockwork. But yesterday he called asking for an extra 1,000, and something about his explanation didn't sit right. My legs went weak. I sat down on the curb outside the store. Helen, why have you been sending Jackson money? Because of your gambling problem, dear. Jackson explained how you'd developed a gambling addiction after Margaret died, and how you'd lost most of your savings. He said you were too proud to ask for help, but he was struggling to cover his basic expenses while you got treatment. The world tilted sideways. Gambling addiction, treatment. Helen, I need you to know that none of that is true. I've never gambled in my life. I don't even buy lottery tickets. But Jackson said. Her voice trailed off. Byron. He showed me bank statements proving the withdrawals. He had documentation from Gamblers Anonymous about your attendance. He even had a letter from your therapist. All fake, Helen. I've been working double shifts to pay Jackson's tuition. I don't have a gambling problem, and I've never seen a therapist. The silence stretched until I heard her sharp intake of breath. That boy has been lying to me for 3 years. Byron, I've sent him over $12,000. $12,000. Added to my own contributions and whatever else Jackson had scammed from other sources. The total amount being spent on his lifestyle was staggering. Helen, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Don't you apologize for his behavior, Byron Mitchell. That money was intended to help a family in crisis. If Jackson has been using Margaret's memory to manipulate people, her voice turned steely, well, Margaret would be absolutely ashamed. After promising to keep Helen informed about whatever action I took, I decided to visit the university library. Maybe I could find Jackson there and confront him directly. At minimum, I wanted to see how he behaved in his natural academic environment. The library's main study area buzzed with pre-graduation activity. Students clustered around tables covered with laptops, textbooks, and coffee cups. I spotted Jackson in the corner, surrounded by 4 other students who appeared to be working on a group project. I found a seat behind a bookshelf where I could observe without being noticed. Jackson's voice carried clearly in the quiet space. Guys, you're overthinking the Faulkner analysis. I had my tutor write up some notes that'll make this way easier. He pulled out a folder thick with typed pages. She charges $200 per assignment, but it's totally worth it. I haven't actually read a full book since freshman year. One of his classmates, a serious-looking young woman with red hair, frowned. Jackson, isn't that kind of cheating? Not if you don't get caught. Jackson laughed. Besides, my portfolio's been killing it this semester. Made enough to hire professional editors for my thesis, too. Why waste time reading boring books when you can pay experts to do the work? Your investment portfolio? Asked a male student with thick glasses. Dude, how'd you get started with that? My parents have been begging me to learn about financial planning. Family money, mostly. My dad owns like 15 rental properties around the county, plus his construction consulting firm. Started me with $100,000 when I turned 18 and told me to make it grow. Up to almost $300,000 now. My hands clenched into fists. Jackson was casually lying about academic fraud while inventing financial success I'd never achieved. But worse, he was dishonoring the hours I'd spent researching his assignments with him during high school. The evenings Margaret had spent reading his essays and offering gentle suggestions for improvement. Must be nice having family money, the red-haired girl said wistfully. Some of us actually have to earn our grades. Hey, don't hate the player. Jackson grinned. Besides, the professors eat up my inspiring orphan story when I need deadline extensions. Hard to argue with a kid who supposedly grew up in foster care and put himself through college. Orphan story? My vision blurred with rage. Jackson was telling professors he was an orphan while simultaneously bragging to friends about family wealth. I left the library before I did something that would get me arrested. On my drive home, I stopped at Kroger to pick up groceries, standing in the cereal aisle, trying to decide between generic cornflakes and the name brand that cost $2 more. My phone rang. Mr. Mitchell? This is Professor Andrews from the English department. I teach Jackson's Contemporary American Literature seminar. Good afternoon, Professor. I'm calling because Jackson submitted his final thesis yesterday, and I wanted to express my sympathies regarding your ongoing medical situation. Not again. Professor Andrews, what medical situation? The cancer diagnosis. Jackson explained that his thesis might be submitted late due to the emotional stress of your chemotherapy treatments. Has been quite worried about the financial burden of your treatment, affecting his ability to complete his final semester. Cancer. Jackson had given me cancer to buy himself deadline extensions. Professor, I don't have cancer. I've never had cancer. I'm in perfect health. The silence lasted longer than any of the previous calls. When Professor Andrews spoke again, his voice carried a different tone entirely. Mr. Mitchell, Jackson has been using your supposed illness as justification for missing classes and late assignments for the entire semester. He submitted a letter from Street, Murray's oncology department, detailing your treatment schedule and prognosis. I've never been to an oncology department. I think Jackson has been submitting fraudulent medical documentation to multiple professors and administrators. This is very serious, Mr. Mitchell. Academic dishonesty of this magnitude could result in immediate expulsion. You'll need to report this to the department chair immediately. After hanging up, I sat in my car in the Kroger parking lot, staring at shoppers pushing carts full of groceries I couldn't afford. Jackson hadn't just lied about our family's wealth or created fake medical emergencies. Head turned me into a fictional character whose suffering he could exploit for academic advantage. Margaret had always said that character was more important than intelligence, that integrity mattered more than success. Jackson had chosen the opposite path, had sacrificed every value Wed tried to teach him in pursuit of an easy road to achievement. But what hurt most was realizing that in his fictional narratives, I was either dead, disabled, or absent entirely. Jackson had erased me from his story in every way that mattered. I existed only as a source of money or a convenient excuse for his failures. Tomorrow, I would learn just how deep his deceptions ran. Because if Jackson could fake cancer diagnoses and create elaborate investment portfolios out of thin air, there was no limit to what other lies he might have told. Saturday morning brought an invitation I'd never expected to receive. Chelsea called while I was replacing window screens at the hardware store, her voice bright with nervous energy. Mr. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me calling again. After our conversation yesterday, I spoke with my parents about everything. They'd really like to meet you before graduation. Would you consider joining us for brunch today? We're having a small gathering for Jackson at the country club. The country club. I'd driven past Millbrook Country Club countless times while doing landscaping work in the wealthy neighborhoods nearby. I'd never imagined setting foot inside as a guest. Chelsea, I appreciate the invitation, but am not sure that's appropriate given the current situation with Jackson's payment. Please, Mr. Mitchell, my father specifically asked me to invite you. He wants to discuss something important regarding Jackson's future. And honestly, after what you told me about the lies, I think you deserve to hear what Jackson's been saying about his family background. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I drove home, showered, and put on my graduation shirt with a clip-on tie that had belonged to Margaret's father. Looking in the mirror, I saw exactly what Jackson was ashamed of. A working-class man whose hands showed the calluses and scars of honest labor. Millbrook Country Club sat on 200 acres of perfectly manicured grounds. The main building looked like something from a movie, all white columns and sweeping verandas. I gave the valet my car keys, embarrassed by the rust spots on my Honda's bumper, and walked through doors that probably cost more than I made in a month. The Romano family had reserved a private dining room overlooking the 18th green. Chelsea's father, Robert, stood as I entered. A man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. Byron, please, come in. I've been looking forward to meeting Jackson's father. Chelsea's mother, Diana, rose gracefully from her seat. Her jewelry caught the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Mr. Mitchell, we've heard so much about you. Jackson speaks of you constantly. As they seated me at a table set with more silverware than I'd ever seen in one place, Robert began the conversation I'd been dreading. Byron, Chelsea has told us about the concerning discrepancies in Jackson's accounts of your family situation. But before we address that, I want you to know how impressed we are with the young man you've raised. Impressed. Diana leaned forward, her smile warm but puzzled. Jackson has such inspiring stories about growing up in foster care and putting himself through college after aging out of the system. His resilience in overcoming childhood trauma is remarkable. My coffee cup clinked against the saucer as my hand trembled. Foster care, the way he describes surviving those difficult years, working multiple jobs while maintaining his grades, never letting his orphan status hold him back. Robert continued, "It's exactly the kind of background we admire. Self-made, determined, grateful for every opportunity." Chelsea placed her hand on my arm. "Dad, there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Mitchell is Jackson's biological father. He's very much alive and has been supporting Jackson throughout college." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's confident expression shifted to confusion, then concern. "I'm sorry. I think there's been a mistake. Jackson told us his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. He has been living independently since age 18. That's not true," I said quietly. "Jackson's mother died of cancer 3 years ago, but I've been alive and working to support his education throughout college." Deanna's face went pale. "But the Scholarship Foundation. We've been contributing to the Orphan Assistance Program that's been helping Jackson since his freshman year. Our family has donated $15,000 specifically because of his inspiring background. Orphan Assistance Program. Scholarship Foundation." Jackson had created an entire fictional charity network around his supposed parentless status. "How much assistance has Jackson received through these programs?" I asked. Robert consulted his phone, pulling up what appeared to be financial records. "Between our family foundation, the Rotary Club Scholarship, and the university's Orphan Assistance Fund, Jackson has received approximately $30,000 per year for 4 years. We've also established a trust fund for his post-graduation transition that currently holds $50,000. $170,000. Jackson had fraudulently obtained nearly $200,000 by claiming to be an orphan while I worked myself into the ground paying his legitimate tuition costs. There's more," Diana added softly. "Jackson is scheduled to give the commencement speech as this year's Triumph Over Adversity recipient. His essay about overcoming orphanhood was selected from over 300 submissions. The local newspaper is planning a feature story about his inspiring journey. My son was going to stand in front of thousands of people and lie about being an orphan while I sat in the audience, if Head allowed me to attend. He was going to accept awards and recognition for suffering Head never experienced, while the man Hod actually sacrificed everything sat invisibly in the crowd. Mr. Mitchell," Robert's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems. "As an attorney, I need to tell you that Jackson's actions constitute multiple felonies: fraud, theft by deception, potentially mail fraud if any of his false documents cross state lines. We're looking at potential prison time." Before I could respond, Jackson himself walked into the dining room. Had clearly expected to find only Chelsea and her parents. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally panic as he realized the conversation had interrupted. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Apparently learning about my own death," I replied calmly, "and your remarkable survival as an orphan." Jackson's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. He looked around the table at faces that had shifted from sympathy to cold suspicion. "I can explain everything," he began. "Please do," Robert said icily. "Explain how you've defrauded multiple organizations while your father worked himself into poverty supporting your education." "It's not like that, Dad. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Chelsea's family, they have expectations. They needed to see that I was worthy of their daughter, that I had overcome challenges. So you killed me off and erased your mother's memory to make yourself more interesting." The words came out louder than it intended, causing other diners to glance our way. "You wouldn't understand," Jackson said desperately. "You've never had to compete in this world. These people respect success, achievement, overcoming obstacles. They don't respect." He gestured vaguely in my direction. They don't respect what, Jackson? Hardware store clerks, he whispered. They don't respect ordinary people who never accomplished anything special. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. In that moment, I saw exactly what my son had become. Someone who measured worth by wealth, who viewed my decades of honest work as shameful failure. Chelsea stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Get out, Jackson. Just get out. Chelsea, please. Let me explain. You've been lying to me about everything. Your family, your background, your values. You took money from my family's charity under false pretenses. You've been lying to everyone for 4 years. Tears streamed down her face. I don't even know who you are. The ring, Jackson said desperately. I bought you that ring with money I earned. My portfolio. Your portfolio doesn't exist, I interrupted. That ring was purchased with money intended for textbooks and living expenses. Money I earned working 16-hour days while you ate at restaurants you'll never be able to afford. Robert Romano stood, his lawyer instincts taking over. Jackson, I strongly advise you to leave immediately and retain legal counsel. My family will be contacting the authorities regarding the fraudulent donations, and I suspect the university will be conducting their own investigation. As Jackson stood to leave, his face a mask of panic and rage, he turned back to me. This is all your fault. If you'd been successful, if you'd given me something to be proud of, I wouldn't have needed to make up stories. But look at yourself. Look at where you live, what you drive, how you dress. You're an embarrassment. The dining room fell completely silent. Even the servers stopped moving, sensing the emotional explosion happening at our table. Jackson, I said quietly, your mother worked 2 jobs as a waitress to save for your college fund. I've worked 70-hour weeks for 4 years to give you opportunities we never had. The only embarrassment in this room is the man who repaid that sacrifice with lies and theft. He left without another word, and I sat in that elegant dining room surrounded by people who'd been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had. The difference was that their money would be returned through legal action. My 4 years of sacrifice, my emptied retirement account, my broken body from overwork. None of that could be recovered. But the deepest cut wasn't financial. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, Eid failed as a father. Margaret and I had raised a boy who valued image over integrity, who'd rather commit fraud than acknowledge his working-class roots. The question now was whether it was too late to teach him the lessons Wed somehow failed to instill, or whether the best thing I could do for Jackson was let him face the consequences of his choices, even if it meant watching him destroy everything Wed worked to build. Sunday morning, I sat in my apartment surrounded by 4 years' worth of financial records, tuition receipts, and bank statements. Every canceled check, every wire transfer confirmation, every receipt for money orders sent to the university's billing office. The paper trail of my sacrifice laid out in neat chronological piles across my kitchen table. But I'd also spent the weekend gathering evidence of Jackson's deceptions. Mrs. Henderson had forwarded all their email correspondence, including Jackson's heart-wrenching descriptions of my supposed gambling addiction and pleas for financial help during my fictional recovery. The Romano family had provided documentation of their charitable contributions, complete with Jackson's fraudulent orphan application essays. Most damning was the university paperwork I'd requested through an emergency records review. Dean Williams had expedited the process after our previous conversation, and the files revealed the stunning scope of Jackson's academic dishonesty. Forged medical documents, plagiarized assignments, deadline extensions based on fabricated family emergencies. His entire senior year was built on lies. At 10 o'clock, I called Dean Williams' office. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for calling. I've completed my review of Jackson's file, and I have to say, this is the most extensive case of academic fraud I've encountered in 15 years of university administration. What happens now? Normally, a case this severe would result in immediate expulsion and degree forfeiture. However, Jackson's graduation is scheduled for Tuesday, and we have several complications to consider. The commencement speech he's scheduled to give, the media coverage planned around his inspirational story, the scholarship donors who will be in attendance. I understood the university's dilemma. Jackson's lies had created a public relations nightmare that couldn't be easily unwound. Dean Williams, I'm going to make this simple for you. I'm prepared to testify to everything I've discovered, both to university administration and to law enforcement if necessary. Jackson has committed fraud against your institution, against charitable organizations, and against his own family. The only question is how you want to handle the investigation. Mr. Mitchell, what outcome are you seeking? If your goal is purely punitive, my goal is accountability. Jackson needs to understand that actions have consequences, something his mother and I apparently failed to teach him adequately. We scheduled a formal hearing for Monday morning. Dean Williams assured me that Jackson's degree would not be conferred until the investigation was complete, regardless of Tuesday's ceremony. Next, I drove to Romano family law offices. Robert had insisted on meeting with me personally after Saturday's revelation, and his receptionist had scheduled an emergency appointment for Sunday afternoon. Robert's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building he'd often admired from the sidewalk. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Robert gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Byron, I want you to understand that my family bears some responsibility for what happened. We should have verified Jackson's background before contributing such substantial amounts to the assistance programs. You were trying to help a young man you believed had overcome tremendous hardship. Jackson exploited your generosity. Nevertheless, I've spoken with the other scholarship donors, and we've agreed on a course of action. We're demanding immediate repayment of all fraudulent donations, plus interest. If Jackson cannot repay the money, we'll be filing criminal fraud charges. Robert slid a folder across his desk. I've also prepared a comprehensive report for the district attorney's office, detailing Jackson's crimes: wire fraud, theft by deception, fraudulent charitable solicitation. Conservative estimates put his total theft at over $200,000. $200,000. The number staggered me. There's something else, Byron. Chelsea told Jackson yesterday that their engagement is permanently ended. She also informed him that her family will be pursuing all available legal remedies. Jackson called this morning begging for mercy, claiming he'll repay everything if we'll drop the charges. What did you tell him? That character isn't built through mercy unearned. That young man needs to face real consequences before he destroys his entire life through fraudulent schemes. As I drove home, my phone rang constantly. Jackson, calling with increasing desperation. I didn't answer. Monday morning, I arrived at the university administration building wearing the same shirt I'd planned to wear to graduation. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, containing only a conference table and 8 chairs. Dean Williams sat at the head, flanked by the department chair of English Literature, the director of student financial aid, and a woman I didn't recognize who introduced herself as the university's legal counsel. Jackson sat alone on the opposite side of the table, his usual confidence replaced by obvious panic. Head lost weight since Saturday, his face gaunt and eyes red-rimmed. Mr. Mitchell, Dean Williams began. Thank you for participating in this emergency hearing. We've reviewed all the documentation you provided, and we've conducted our own investigation into Jackson's academic record. The next 2 hours detailed the complete destruction of Jackson's college career. Professor after professor had discovered plagiarized work, forged documentation, and fraudulent excuse letters. His thesis advisor revealed that Jackson's entire senior project had been purchased from an online academic writing service. The academic integrity violations alone warrant immediate expulsion, the department chair stated. Combined with the financial fraud, Jackson faces potential criminal prosecution and permanent dismissal from this institution. Jackson finally spoke, his voice barely audible. I want to make this right. I'll pay back every penny. I'll retake every class I cheated in. Just please, don't destroy my future over this. Jackson, I said quietly, you destroyed your own future when you chose fraud over honesty. Dad, please. You don't understand what it's like being surrounded by wealthy kids whose parents hand them everything. I just wanted to fit in, to be worthy of the opportunities you worked so hard to give me. For a moment, I felt a flicker of my old protective instincts. Then I remembered his words from Saturday. You're an embarrassment. Jackson, fitting in never required stealing from charities or lying about orphan status. You had every opportunity to succeed honestly. The university's decision was swift and final. Jackson's degree was revoked, his enrollment terminated immediately, and a formal report filed with law enforcement. His scheduled commencement speech was canceled, replaced with a generic address from the valedictorian. As we left the hearing room, Jackson grabbed my arm. Dad, I need help. Chelsea won't speak to me. Her family's threatening to have me arrested. The university wants their scholarship money back immediately, and I don't have it. I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Behind the panic and desperation, I finally saw the little boy who used to help me stock shelves at the hardware store, who'd begged Margaret for one more story every bedtime. Jackson, what exactly do you want from me? Fix this. You always fix things when I mess up. Pay back the money, talk to the Romano family, convince the university to give me another chance. No. The word came out clear and final. No explanations. No negotiations. No rescue mission. What do you mean, no? I mean that for the first time in your life, you're going to face the consequences of your choices without me cleaning up your mess. Jackson's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally something that might have been the beginning of real understanding. So that's it? You're just going to abandon me? I'm going to let you learn what your mother and I should have taught you years ago. That actions have consequences. That integrity matters more than image. And that real success comes from character, not deception. I walked away from my son for what I thought might be the last time. But as I reached my car, something Margaret used to say echoed in my memory. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone hit bottom, so they can finally decide to climb back up. Jackson's bottom was waiting. The question was whether he'd find the strength to start climbing. Tuesday morning dawned gray and drizzling, fitting weather for what should have been Jackson's graduation day. I sat in my apartment drinking coffee and listening to the local news. The anchor mentioned that university commencement ceremonies would proceed as planned despite last-minute schedule adjustments to the student speaker lineup. No mention of fraud or academic dishonesty. The university had managed their public relations crisis efficiently, replacing Jackson's inspiring orphan speech with a safer alternative, while quietly handling the criminal investigation behind closed doors. My phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. Jackson, calling repeatedly with the desperate persistence of someone whose world was collapsing. Id finally turned off the ringer, but the red missed call notification climbed steadily. 12 calls, 15, 20. At 9:30, someone knocked on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw Jackson standing in the hallway, soaked from the rain and looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dad, please, I know you're angry, but we need to talk. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Jackson stood dripping on my doormat, holding a manila envelope against his chest. The police came to my apartment this morning. They have a warrant for my arrest on fraud charges. The Romano family filed a formal complaint, and the district attorney is pursuing felony prosecution. I'm sorry to hear that. You're sorry. Jackson's voice cracked. That's it? Your son is facing prison time and you're sorry. I'm sorry that you made choices that led to this consequence, but I'm not surprised by it. Jackson pushed wet hair away from his face, and I noticed his hands were shaking. The university called every scholarship foundation I applied to over 4 years. They're all demanding repayment. The total is $312,000. $300,000, even more than it estimated. How are you planning to repay that money, Jackson? I can't. I don't have it. I never had it. Everything I spent came from the scholarship funds or from you. He pulled papers from the envelope. Chelsea's father wants to seize my car, my apartment, everything, but I don't actually own any of it. The car loan was based on false income statements. The apartment lease was co-signed using fake financial references. The house of cards had finally collapsed completely. Jackson stood before me with nothing but debt and criminal charges. What do you want me to do about this, son? Help me, please. I know I screwed up, but you're my father. You're supposed to help me when I'm in trouble. I am helping you. For the first time in your life, I'm helping you by not helping you." Jackson stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. What does that even mean? It means that every time you've made a mistake, I've fixed it. Every time you've faced a consequence, I've removed it. I've been enabling your bad choices by protecting you from their results. So you're just going to let me go to prison? I'm going to let you learn that your actions matter, that other people aren't pawns in your personal story. That integrity has value even when nobody's watching. Jackson slumped against the doorframe, rainwater pooling at his feet. Chelsea won't even look at me. Her entire family thinks him a criminal. My roommate moved out and took all his stuff. The professors who used to recommend me for internships won't return my calls. What did you expect, Jackson? You built relationships on lies. When the lies came out, the relationships dissolved. But I love Chelsea. I really do love her. You loved the idea of her. The wealthy, connected girlfriend who made you feel important. But you never loved her enough to tell her the truth about who you really are. Jackson was crying now, tears mixing with rainwater as they dripped off his chin. At 22 years old, my son was finally experiencing real consequences for the first time in his life. What am I supposed to do now? I have no degree, no job prospects, no references who will vouch for me. I owe more money than I'll make in a decade. You're supposed to start over. From the bottom, with nothing but your own effort and honesty. I don't know how to do that. Then you'll learn. The same way I learned when your mother died and I had to figure out how to raise a son and pay for college on a hardware store salary. Jackson looked up at me, something shifting in his expression. You never complained. All those years, working extra shifts and living in this tiny apartment. You never once said it was too hard or that you couldn't do it, because I was doing it for someone I loved. But Jackson, I was doing it for the son I thought you were, not the person you actually became. Who did you think I was? Someone who would appreciate sacrifice instead of taking it for granted. Someone who would honor his mother's memory instead of exploiting it for sympathy. Someone who would value character over image. We stood in silence for several minutes. Jackson's phone buzzed repeatedly with what I assumed were calls from lawyers, police, or creditors. Dad, if I try to fix this, if I try to become the person you thought I was, would you? He paused, struggling with words. Would you be willing to help me learn how? What would that look like, Jackson? I don't know. Maybe I could work at the hardware store while I figure out how to pay back the money I stole. Maybe I could take community college classes at night and try to earn an honest degree. Maybe I could start telling the truth about who I am instead of making up stories. And what about the criminal charges? I'll face them. If I have to go to jail, then I'll go to jail. But when I get out, I want to be someone Mom would have been proud of. For the first time since this crisis began, I heard something genuine in Jackson's voice. Not panic or manipulation or desperation, but something that might have been the beginning of actual remorse. Jackson, I can't protect you from the legal consequences of your actions. But if you're serious about changing, really serious, then we can talk about what that might look like. I'm serious, Dad. I'm more serious than I've ever been about anything. Then the first step is simple. You're going to call every person you lied to and tell them the truth. The professors, the scholarship committees, the donors, everyone. You're going to apologize without making excuses and ask what you can do to make amends. Jackson nodded slowly. And then you're going to get a job, any job, and start paying people back. $5 at a time if necessary. But you're going to return every penny you stole. That could take decades. Then it takes decades. Character isn't built overnight, Jackson. It's built through years of small choices to do the right thing even when it's hard. As Jackson turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. Dad, I'm sorry. Not just about the money or the lies. I'm sorry I said you were an embarrassment. You're not. You're the most honorable man I know, and I'm ashamed that I was too stupid to see it. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table looking at Margaret's photo. For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. Jackson had finally hit bottom, but maybe, just maybe, he was ready to start climbing back up. The graduation ceremony was starting in 3 hours. I wouldn't be attending, but for the first time since this began, that felt like the right choice. Jackson needed to understand that respect and dignity couldn't be faked or stolen. They had to be earned, one honest day at a time. 6 months later, I stood behind the cash register at Hendricks Hardware, watching Jackson help Mrs. Patterson load 40-pound bags of mulch into her truck. His college soft hands had developed calluses, and his once perfect hair was perpetually dusty from warehouse work. "Your boy's a good worker, Byron." "Mr." Hendricks commented, joining me at the counter. "Polite to customers, never complains about overtime, shows up every day on time." Hard to find young people with that kind of work ethic anymore. Jackson had started at the store 3 days after our conversation in my doorway. Minimum wage, part-time hours between court appearances and community service obligations. Head moved back into my apartment, sleeping on the couch and contributing every penny of his paycheck toward restitution payments. The legal consequences had been severe, but fair. 18 months of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and a restitution order requiring him to repay the full $312,000. The judge had been particularly stern about the orphan fraud, calling it a despicable exploitation of genuine charitable intent. But Jackson had faced it all without asking me to intervene. Had hired a public defender, pled guilty to all charges, and made a statement taking full responsibility for his actions. The local newspaper, which had planned to feature his inspirational story, instead ran an article about scholarship fraud that Jackson had specifically requested, hoping to prevent other students from making similar choices. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if we can deliver the rest of her order Thursday morning," Jackson said, approaching the counter with dirt-stained work gloves tucked into his back pocket. "Thursday works fine. Make sure you bring the dolly for the heavy bags. Already loaded it in the truck." This version of Jackson still surprised me sometimes. The boy who'd once paid someone else to write his essays now anticipated customer needs and solved problems without being asked. The young man who'd considered manual labor beneath him had become our most reliable employee. That evening, as we closed the store together, Jackson brought up a conversation we'd been having for weeks. "I've been looking at community college programs again. The business management associate degree would let me take most classes at night and weekends. Still interested in business?" "Yeah, but different now. I was thinking about small business operations, maybe learning how places like this work." Mr. Hendricks mentioned that hardware stores need people who understand both the retail side and the operational side. "That's honest work, Jackson. Good work. It is, isn't it?" He paused, organizing receipts from the day's sales. "Chelsea called yesterday. This was the first time Head mentioned her name since the arrest. How is she?" "Good. Shay's in graduate school now, studying nonprofit administration. Says she wants to work for organizations that help kids who actually are in foster care." He smiled ruefully. "Says meeting me taught her the importance of proper verification procedures for assistance programs." "Did she forgive you?" We talked for about an hour. She said she doesn't hate me anymore, which is progress. But she also said she could never trust me again, which I understand. I destroyed something that was real by building it on lies. Jackson had learned to speak about his mistakes with a matter-of-fact honesty that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. His therapist, a requirement of his probation, had helped him understand the psychological patterns that led to his deception. "There's something else, Dad. I've been attending a support group for people who've committed fraud or theft. Sounds weird, but it helps to talk to other people who understand what it's like to rebuild your life after you've destroyed your own credibility." "How many people are in the group?" "About 12 regular members. Different ages, different crimes, but all trying to figure out how to live honestly after years of lying." Jackson turned off the store lights and locked the cash register. "The group leader says that making amends isn't just about paying money back. It's about becoming someone who would never make those choices again." We walked upstairs to my apartment together, a routine that had become comfortable over the months. Jackson cooked dinner most nights, having learned basic kitchen skills out of necessity. Tonight was spaghetti with sauce from a jar, simple food that tasted better because it was earned honestly. "I got something in the mail today," Jackson said, setting plates on the small table. A letter from Mrs. Henderson. Helen Henderson had been remarkably gracious throughout Jackson's legal troubles. Shed testified about the money Shed sent him, but Shed also written a letter to the judge describing Jackson's apology and his commitment to repayment. What did she say? She included a copy of a letter Mom wrote her about 6 months before she died, about her hopes for my future, about the kind of man she wanted me to become. Jackson's voice caught slightly. "Mrs. Henderson said she thought I should read it now, when I might finally be ready to understand what Mom was really hoping for." Jackson pulled the letter from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. Margaret's handwriting, familiar from grocery lists and birthday cards, covered both sides of pale blue stationery. "Would you read it to me, son?" Jackson cleared his throat and began. "Dear Helen, I've been thinking a lot about Jackson's future lately. The doctors say I might not see him graduate college, but I'm not worried about that anymore. Byron will make sure Jackson gets his education. What I worry about is whether we're raising him with the right values. I see how some of his friends act, how they think money and status are what matter. I want Jackson to understand that real success means being someone people can count on. I want him to value integrity over intelligence, kindness over cleverness. I want him to understand that the man who works honestly to support his family is worth a dozen smooth talkers who've never earned anything through their own effort. Most of all, I want him to honor the sacrifices others make for him by becoming worthy of those sacrifices. Byron works so hard to give Jackson opportunities we never had. I pray that Jackson will use those opportunities to become the kind of man who makes the world a little better, not just more comfortable for himself." Jackson folded the letter carefully, tears streaming down his face. She knew, didn't she? She knew I might turn out exactly like the people she was worried about. She hoped you wouldn't. And Jackson, Shed be proud of who you're becoming now. How can you say that? I'm 22 years old, living with my father, working at a hardware store for $8 an hour, and he'll be paying off debt for the next 15 years. Because you're doing it honestly. Because you're taking responsibility for your mistakes instead of running away from them. Because you're becoming someone people can count on. Jackson wiped his eyes with his sleeve, a gesture that reminded me of the little boy had once been. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said months ago." "What's that?" "You saved my life by freezing that payment. If you'd kept enabling my lies, I would have just gotten better at lying. I would have graduated and moved to some city where nobody knew my history, and I would have kept being the kind of person who uses other people. You saved your own life, Jackson, by choosing to change instead of choosing to blame everyone else. But you showed me that change was possible when you said no to helping me. For the first time in my life, you showed me that my choices actually mattered." We finished dinner in comfortable silence, both of us thinking about Margaret and the future Shed envisioned. Jackson washed dishes while I reviewed the next day's delivery schedule. Normal evening activities for a normal family, except that we'd both learned how precious normal could be. "Dad, I have a question." "Go ahead." "When I finish paying back all the money I owe, when I complete my probation, when I have a degree I actually earned." Jackson paused, choosing his words carefully. "Do you think there's any chance I could end up being the kind of man you and Mom always hoped he'd become?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. The entitlement was gone, replaced by genuine humility. The lies had been replaced by uncomfortable honesty. The boy who'd once been ashamed of my work clothes now wore his own with pride. "Jackson, I think you're already becoming that man. Every honest day of work, every difficult conversation, every choice to do the right thing, even when it costs you something. That's how character is built. It's going to take a long time. The best things usually do." Later that evening, as Jackson studied community college catalogs at the kitchen table and I balanced the store's books, I thought about Margaret's letter. Shed understood something it missed during Jackson's childhood. That protecting him from consequences wasn't love. It was fear. Fear that he couldn't handle difficulty. Fear that He'd think less of me if I couldn't solve his problems. But real love meant preparing him for a world that wouldn't coddle him, teaching him that respect was earned through character rather than granted through status. It meant showing him that ordinary work done with integrity was more valuable than extraordinary success built on deception. Jackson would graduate from community college in 2 years if he maintained his current schedule. It wouldn't be the prestigious degree Margaret and I had originally envisioned, but it would be something more valuable. An education earned honestly by someone who understood its true worth. The scholarship money would be repaid gradually, $500 per month for the next 40 years if necessary. Jackson had calculated it exactly, creating a spreadsheet that tracked every payment and projected completion date. Head taped it to our refrigerator, a daily reminder of the debt he was working to resolve. But the most important debt had already been repaid. Jackson had returned to being the son Margaret had hoped for, the young man who valued character over image and understood that real success meant being worthy of the sacrifices others made for him. As I watched him study, highlighter in hand and notebook filled with his own handwriting, I realized that Margaret's dream hadn't been destroyed by his mistakes. It had simply taken a longer, more difficult path to fulfillment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. Sometimes saying no is the greatest gift you can give. And sometimes the child you're trying to save can only be rescued by allowing them to save themselves. Jackson had learned that lesson the hard way, but had learned it completely. And that made all the difference. Now, I'd like to ask you something. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to stop helping someone you love so they could learn to help themselves? How do you find the strength to watch someone struggle when you could easily make their life easier? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way back to what matters most. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to let someone face the consequences of their choices. That's how they learn to make better ones.